Hi, I'm Edmunds with Distortions Unlimited, and you're watching Monster Lab. Now, whenever you do something for the first time, it's a little intimidating. So I came up with this little ditty to help you out. And it's called
Monster Logic.
And it goes like this. The more you do it, the easier it gets. The easier it gets, the more you want to do it. The more you do it, the better looking, the funner it is. The funner it is, the more you want to do it. The more you do it, the better you get. The better you get, the more fun it is to do and better to look at. And in the end, you end up with a bunch of really cool custom monsters. Monster Logic. All right, so today we are going to do hands. Now, these are hands that you wear, and I was thinking of all sorts of different things we could do. We took a poll, and by a landslide, monster hands was what people want to see. And I'm thinking, well, of course, you know, if you do a mask, you need hands. And I mean, if it's a fur character, well, you get sew a costume. If it's an alien, you get a silver thing. And so hands is really one of the most important things, and it is a little trick. It's a little, there's a lot of little things about it. I'm gonna walk you through it. I would recommend watching this all the way through, maybe taking some notes, because there's some little tips along the way that will help you a lot. So what I've done is I've taken a piece of wood, and this wood is, I would say it's about 1 foot by 2 feet. And it's just enough to make two hands side by side like this. And so I've got these, and I came up with these by measuring from here to how deep I want it. Now it's a little deeper than I'm actually gonna do it, because I always put clay down in the bottom for molding reasons. We'll go over that later. And then I have 4 of these little blocks just to help lock it in place. And we're gonna screw those in like this. Now, this normally I'd probably have Mike weld up something for me, but I don't want to make stumbling blocks for this series. So this could be dowel rods stuck in a circle with hot glue. It could be flat strap, you know, like 1 inch thick by an 1/8 inch thick. You just bend it, drill a couple of holes. It really could be anything. What you want to end up with is something that's not too big that the clay can be put on, and it's important. Now this could have been a 2x4, but you know, that wouldn't have fit. So this, I felt like this is wafer board, and it's real strong, and it is not too big. It's gonna fit inside my hand. And of course, I'll be sculpting oversized. Now this is the first thing to make note of. You're going to have to sculpt this thing bigger than real hands. Number one, it has to be bigger than your hand because you got to stick your hand in it. And number two, it has to be bigger than your hand because the thickness of the rubber is going to shrink it inside. And number three, you want to make it bigger than that because the latex itself shrinks. And so I'll leave that to you, but I would say count on 1/4 of an inch at least bigger than your hands. You're going to be extending the fingers. And the other thing we decided on this film is we wanted to make this comprehensive. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make alien hands. We need alien hands as a company. I went on the internet trying to find alien hands for a costume. Very, very limited. In fact, hands in general, everybody wants to do masks. And I get that, but if you're serious about making a costume, this is very important. So we're going to do alien hands, but I'm going to do a finger that's like a monster hand. I'm going to do a finger that's like a corpse hand to show you those techniques as we go, so that you can confidently know, and everything else stays the same. 2-piece mold, how you make the dam, everything's the same. It's just the sculpture slightly different. So that's the goal, and I'm going to start screwing down these boards to this wood, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so I take my 2 little pieces of wood and screw them in a little bit from the edge so that, you know, you've got room for your sculpture and then the plaster that'll go around it. And just screw these in. Now I'm going to toe this in so the screw goes in at an angle, and I'll try to get it into the bottom board mostly, but maybe a little into the board that I just screwed on. And I would put a couple in, and plywood or wafer board actually works better for something like this than a regular trim board or something, because it's not going to split like normal wood would. It's all interlocked and okay, so those are pretty solid, but just to be sure, I'm going to put another little block right behind it. Just give it a little more strength. Okay, so those are really solid. What I'm going to do is pack clay around them and cover the wood completely. But we're going to use wire on this. Now, I debated about using wire. I don't like using wire for a few reasons. One, since it's water-based clay, it will shrink as it dries, and you'll want it to dry, especially on this, for damming it, because you've got to get in all those fingers and things. But the problem is, if I use wire, it can shrink sometimes and make a little crack, and that's irritating. You got to fill that in. If I don't use wire and I make a boo-boo and I hit it, then the finger breaks off, and that's very irritating. Then you need a little, maybe a little stick and cram it back on there and wet it down. And I thought, well, if I do that, and I've been doing this for years, odds are that might happen to you. And so the wire is nice, so that you bump it, and maybe it cracks and stuff, but it's right there. You just give it a little water. If you crack any of these fingers off, just spray it, the crack, both the top and the bottom, and kind of stick it back in. And it'll be fine. You can smooth the crack and things. But I did a compromise, because normally when we've done this with like 1/8" wire, something like that. I got some wire that is much thinner. This, you're not going to be able to tell, but this is like pencil lead, or a little smaller. So what I'm thinking is, and I've never done this quite, so bear with me, I'm going to loop it through the fingers and attach it to the board, tape it down good, and that'll give me holding power for the clay as I work, and it shouldn't crack. So that's what we're going to do. To help hold the wire, I'm going to put a couple of screws on each side. And always be wary of stuff you've done to the armature, because you don't want to be hammering with your fists and then, oh, I got a screw sticking out there. Ouch. Let's see. Okay. So let's try our great experiment here. Get you out of the way. So those two screws will give me a fairly solid base. And I'm bending this in so I don't do what I just warned you about. So what you'll want to do is, now this is where I planned on having that board in, because I've got to go up for the fingers. So this guy's gonna have pretty long fingers. If I make them too long, I'll just fold them down later, but I'm gonna assume this guy's gonna have pretty crazy fingers. Let's see, now that's not right. And try to close them off a little bit so you don't, one of the worst things is hitting the armature. It's one of the scourges of being a monster maker. You're sculpting along, you're being all artistic, and then you got to deal with armature. Okay. It's actually here. Gonna add an extra screw up front here. Make life a little easier, hopefully. Okay, I just made one of those things I warned you about. I got a screw sticking out here. And rather than you laughing and laughing as I scream uncontrollably, I'll knock that off. All right, so here, this is a little taller. I made this kind of stupid extra long. I just didn't want to run out and have to do more screws and such. And it comes down a little. Okay. I also thought about going 3 fingers, and we did a set of alien hands that way one time where you put your hand like this and you can have 3 fingers and a thumb. But I decided against that because these aren't going to be that big, so it would kind of be a fat finger, and I decided against that. Uh-oh. I'm going to feed this through the little loop that's created. I'm going to stabilize all this with duct tape also, but okay. And lastly, the thumb. Yeah. Try not to poke your eyes out, guys. I just scared the cameraman. All right. All right. And a little trick you can do is at the end, if there's a loose wire, you can just give it a little loop. So now I have my fingers all ready. I didn't squish this guy down. And you know, I'll be bending them and things like that. And you can see now these we're pretty far apart. But now, you know, when I get this thumb on, they won't be so far apart. And this will be a single two-piece mold. We won't do a two-piece here and a two-piece here. We'll do one two-piece mold. So I'm going to do the other one, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap that with duct tape. Just kind of hold it in place and try to stretch the duct tape as you go so it's pretty snug. Okay, now. Just a word from my ego. There may be some seasoned professionals that have done this many times and they're looking at this and going, why is he doing it that way? That's so stupid. And it may be, but part of the thing with Monster Lab is I don't want a lot of obstacles. It's like, oh, I got to do this, I got to weld this, I got to do. And so this is a way that stuff that most people have wood lying around and wire lying around and so forth. So, you know, it takes a few minutes. But there you go, a nice little hand armature for your monster hands. So the next step, I think I'm gonna come around and sit down. Okay, so we're all ready. And the first thing I like to do is wet the wood. And that just helps the clay to stick. You don't have to get it soaking, just enough. Now this is going to be the back of my hands. This is going to be the front, the tops. Now this I'm setting to about ½ inch, 3/4, somewhere in there. And these tools come in real handy. And try to squish it enough to make sure that it's touching the wood everywhere. That's, as much as possible, it's good to avoid air pockets. Not the end of the world, but helpful. Now it's a little too soon, but before I forget, you're going to need to make absolutely sure that the circumference, like this, is coming down. And let's see, my hand's about there, so it's probably going to come down around here. And seeing as I'm Popeye, that is 12 inches. So these have to be more than 12 inches, probably 14 inches or something. Right now they're closer to 10. So that's just, you'll need to get a tape measure like this. You can get them at a fabric store. Comes in, there's not a lot of math in sculpting, but when there is, it's very important. I can't remember if I mentioned it before, but this is wed clay, W-E-D wed clay. There are other tutorials we do that discusses wed clay at length. And this could be done with oil-based clay. There's certainly advantages to that because oil-based, you wouldn't get the cracking. If you hit it, it would just bend a little. So it's nice, but it would take a lot longer and be harder to do it all in oil-based clay. One thing you should do a lot as you get closer is put your hand and make sure that you can get your fingers in those locations, and that your fingers, we'll measure these too, but that your fingers will go inside of this with room to spare. Because I've made many hands that, especially after they go into production and shrink. Now, most of you aren't going to worry about that. We're going to discuss that as far as you can. The first mold has to be a two-piece. We're going to show you how to do that. But if you're going to go into mass production, and mass production could be, 20 pieces or whatever, could be 100 pieces, could be 1,000 pieces. You'll want to pull out two pair of hands, Dremel them, make one-piece molds, and so you can pop them out. So I'm going to go over that later, but how to make this so that it can come out of a one-piece mold, which is what it's very important for us to be able to do. Because if you're just doing one pair and it's for you, or a couple pair or something, you can Dremel up and down all those fingers, and it's not a big deal. But if you got to make hundreds, it becomes a big deal. We're just hoping that these end up looking a lot better than they look right now. Or you should demand your money back, I'll tell you that. That is not acceptable. hands are trickier than mass for many reasons. One, you got all these ins and outs of the finger, all the stuff I did with the wires, that goes away. When you do the dams, you've got to put those dams in here. When it comes to dremeling, you got to go up and down. Hands are just more work. But, you know, if I would do your mass and maybe get a few masks under your belt so you're comfortable with the process, and then tackle hands. They're just tougher. They're just more demanding. Okay, so that anatomy, not good. We're gonna work on that a little. I think I'll do that before I finish getting the fingers bulked out, just because it's driving me crazy. So I went a little overboard with the clay, but that's okay. The nice thing about doing hand sculpting is you've got your reference, whoops, right there, so you can kind of, okay, yeah, I get that, and one way to tell if you're getting your anatomy right is ask yourself, if that had to be my hand, would I be happy? And if the answer is no, keep whittling. There's another thing, it's a little soon, but I'm gonna go ahead and deal with it. You can tense your hands and see how the bones pretty much go toward the center here, and this one kind of straight down. So you can kind of just preliminarily, and you might end up drawing these in a few times, but kind of, and this one really's got an angle. So that as if you want to show the tendons, which I will on this because aliens tend to be pretty thin. So I'll follow those lines and maybe not totally go down like this one starts to disappear a little bit, and these two are real predominant. This is pretty much this one. You don't see it too much, but something like that. Just a consideration of what reality. If you don't think and look, that's one thing. If you just keep looking at your real hand and you say, well, no, wait a minute, oh, it's got this little stuff, and these wrinkles go like this, and if I twist it, I get wrinkles. Yeah, there's so many details that if you just, okay, I'm gonna make 4 lines, and there I got the lines. Well, that's not really what it's like. They're different spacing, they're different angles, and veins go over them. Now, I won't put veins over these alien hands, because that, I don't think. I might. We'll see what they look like, but they're a little different. At least what people think an alien would be like. We're not sure because we haven't seen. I think he's hiding with Bigfoot somewhere. We're not sure.
I'm not a human, and I come from the south.
This takes a dive to the thumb, which I'm gonna position that a little better. So this tool, I didn't introduce him, but this is a rake. I really like these two. I tend to use the flat one more because I'm working the surfaces, but these round ones are good too, and they're smooth on one end, they've got teeth on the other, and so you can go in and work the details. The other thing I was using a minute ago was a tool like this, these are wonderful. It's got little teeth around the edges, and so you can go in and kind of do some nice big smooth shapes. Well, they're not smooth, they've got teeth, but the teeth help I don't know, keep track of the angles you're scraping. It seems to work better. There's probably something I don't understand, but you can use smooth ones and they just don't work as well. But you can use them later when you're trying to smooth out a big head or something like that. Now see, I'm hitting my wire, which is very irritating. So I'm gonna okay, it's a little early maybe, but I'm gonna go over a couple of tricks. These are very important for mass production, not so important if you're doing, one of a kind or a few or something, and you're always going to pour out of the original mold, because the original mold, since it divides, you don't have to pull the hand out through a little narrow tunnel. And so if you want to have a hand that's shaped like this and long fingernails, you can just do pretty much what you want. There'll be some issues as you pour it with latex. You'll need to be aware. You may have to tip the mold and things. Not too much of a problem, but when we're pulling and you've got wet latex, you can't have fingers like that. They just rip off. So, but what if you want a tense look? Well, you can pull them back and then go forward and keep almost a straight line, and I'll show you what I mean.
Can we see that?
So, let's say I want this alien to have a little character in his hands. I mean, that's like you're bored, you're sitting there watching TV. This is like I'm about to get you. I don't know if you can see the difference, but bored, gonna get you. So I want to have a little tension. So I'm gonna pull these hands or these fingers up. And then I'll bring in the tendons to follow the action and so forth. Then I'm going to bend them in like that. This is where the wires bug me, but that's all right. The clay's soft. You can work around. Now, if you might want to make sure that if you're going to leave this section alone or something, leave the fingers for a while, that wire is as close to center as possible so that it's not getting in your way later. But what I've done is I've given the fingers tension, but if you look at it from the side, it's almost a straight line. So they just kind of, and so that's just a trick we've learned to instead of having the hands have to be so stiff and natural so you can pull them out of one-piece mold. The other trick is if you have, well, this is even worse, but like if you have knuckles and things and it's straight, you try to pull that thing out, man, it's gonna fight you. But if you, in these things you can hide, you can do subtle things. We are gonna put knuckles on these, but if the shape is like a long pyramid, all you gotta do is break that suction once and out it comes. If it was like this, or it had big old knuckles and stuff, you're pulling and it's not coming, and a lot of times fingers will rip out. So think about whatever's happening down here, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then you can have some little knuckle things, but there's tricks to even that. Like say for instance, you want a kind of a knob to it, for instance. This depends on the character. You can do a knob that way, no problem. But if it's this way, it hooks. So just think about those things. Think about inverting the sculpture and how the latex would flow. Make sure that it's not going to create air bubbles. And then think about, okay, I've poured out the excess and I've dried it, and now I've got to pull this way. Am I going to hook it on things? And so they're things that artistically you may not like, but you can disguise them. Part of the creative process in anything, whether it's a mask or anything, is figuring out how to get the look and have it really work too. And like we've had sculptors do stuff that had skinny little teeth and little membraney things, and it'll never work, you know. And so part of the creative process is like, okay, I want this look. How can I get this look without making something that is ridiculous to try to manufacture? So those, just remember the pyramid. It's more like, sometimes it's like an obelisk where it's a very slow reduction in diameter as it goes up, but if it's just any amount less, it'll just pop right up. So that's just something we try to think about when we're doing stuff. I'm wondering if these are kind of creepy straight. I don't know. I think I'll leave. Now this is another thing. I know we were talking about Tom. We'll do one half the face one way, and it's like, well, I'm not sure about that. Let's try this, and we'll do the other half, and it could just be the size of the eyes or the way the ears bend or whatever it is, and then you do it on both, and you go, I like this side better, and so you make this side like that, and then you're like, well, maybe I'll change the lips to be like this with bigger teeth, and then this, they're a little smaller and smaller teeth or something. And you can go back and forth. And this hand is very simple. You can do one way, the other way, take your pick and go with the one you like. And you can actually look at them in 3D. And of course, drawing, which I had a little bit of a drawing that I put together for these. But if you kind of work it out in the drawing first, it can be very helpful. However, I like to create in clay. I like to move the clay around because now you're seeing it in 3 dimensions in the real world. So I'm going to keep sculpting on this. We're going to turn the dial up on the speed.
Get on it.
But let me just show you some of the usual suspects in case I'm going so fast you don't see them. But these tools I use all the time. These are a little wires that you know you can use for smoothing, you can use for texturing. This little finger tool, and I use that a lot. I use this end too, like for, you know, say you're doing wrinkles or something. This is another favorite. This is wire. It's got a squared off end, which I rarely use. This one, the pointed end, I'll use again for like wrinkling and stuff. So that'll be used. A smaller paintbrush for detailing. I'll have a bigger one for smoothing down the big spaces. Here's another wire tool with more finer wires. I hope you can see that. I'm not sure. And then I've got a real small little detail tool for fine lines that I'll be going in and doing a little knuckle detail and stuff like that. Is there anything else? This, for major smoothing, when I get it close, I'm going to dip this in water, and this is just a very aerated sponge. It's kind of stiff, and this just takes that clay down like nobody's business and smooths it out. I've got a water bucket here, spray bottle here, and that is pretty much it. I've got a little knife that I use for the clay, but those are the tools I'll be using, and so you'll have to watch carefully, but you'll see this take shape, and I may talk over some of it if there's some stuff happening, but rather than this be 4 hours long, we're gonna turn it up. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to take a little station identification break. This is Monster Lab, and do you ever feel tired, need a hand around the house? Sculpt these. All right, so I'm going to get these out of the way. In order for this video to be more comprehensive, a lot of people were asking for monster hands and things. I thought, okay, we're going to show you how to do the hands. And the hands are kind of the hands because you've got 4 fingers and a thumb. And so you're confined somewhat. Now, we did talk about you could do an alien like this with 3 fingers and a thumb, or you could do an alien like this, or some kind of weird creature with 2 fingers and a thumb. But unless they're pretty large and so forth, that's not normally what you're going to do. So the hand's the hand. You've got that, and there'll be some differences in these 3 types of hands. But we've got a beast monster hand, and I'm going to show you how to do that finger and the fingernail. And the fingernail is very important because he needs a fingernail. And then big fingernails. This is an old corpse finger, and he's a little more impoverished and things, showing the bones a little more. And so I'm going to sculpt both of these, and then I'm going to, you can watch it at speed, and then I'm going to show you some of the things I did that are unique from the other pair of hands I'm working on. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to start with our beast monster finger. And the fingernails on something like this usually would be pretty big. There is no limits when you're in, that's not right. Here's something to consider, and I think I've mentioned this in other videos, but I was having a long conversation with Tom as he's doing a new sculpture, that anatomy is very important. And if you push anatomy too far, then it's not believable. But our attitude is the aesthetics of it are more important than anatomy. Anatomy takes second place. I'm sorry, I'm sure there's some traditional artists that won't agree with that. But the argument we were having was jaw. I was looking at this thing and I was like, Tom, that jaw needs to be big and powerful because you got this huge, strong mouth. And he's like, yeah, but this is the way it looks on a kind of a serpentine character. And I'm like, okay, you win. And so, but I say all of that just to make sure that you keep reality in mind, because you can have something that looks really cool, but it couldn't possibly function in the real world. And people, not even realizing what's wrong, will be like, it looks a little strange. So I'm always keep that in mind. And so you would have on a beast that's going to rip your throat out, you would have pretty strong fingernails that wouldn't break, like, you know, somebody's been to the manicure place and have these beautiful long fingernails that, you know, first fist fight they're in, they break them all off and you got to go back. So beast's going to have pretty big fingernails. So I'm kind of defining the area, and then I'm just going to take a piece of clay, and you can put fingernails on these beasts that'll be strong and then will pour up. You could conceivably, if the thing wasn't too big, you could buy fingernails and glue them on. That has no place in the mass-produced world, and it's also very hard, like if you're using this, some creature for filming and things, they can break off. I would recommend staying in rubber, but it can be done. So I'm going to put this fingernail on here, and I'm going to push it into that area. I'm going to have to redefine things and so forth. And here's the trick that I want to make sure you get. You can have a nice long finger. It could be longer than this, as long as you pyramid it back into the finger. If you put something like this, like a real fingernail sticking out, the latex isn't going to want to go in there, and if it does, it'll probably rip off. So I'm not saying it can't be done. You can leave latex in for several days, for instance, And there's actually different formulas, running your formulas and things that other mass producers use that they can get some very teeny little things. But for the most part, it's an incredibly small compromise in my mind to pyramid that shape in. No one will see it. And I don't know, if somebody does and they say, hey, that's too fat for a fingernail, just smack them and say, don't look at that. So basically see how that is, it looks good, but it's the latex will flow into it. So that's my extended explanation for fingernails, but if you don't do it, you'll be sad. And the whole idea of this series is to try to, the best we can, ensure success as you work. Okay, so that's that. Now, keeping in mind the idea of the pyramid, pulling the finger out, if you're going to mass produce. If you're doing a two-piece mold, you can make these knuckles as big and as gnarly as you want. So maybe here, you know, you get a little bit of a knuckle here, close to the nail. You can put something on there and come out a little. And then a bigger one down here. Now the fingers I'm doing on the hand sculpture, those are really long. Those are inhumanly long because it's not a human. So, you know, aliens, when they're pictured, a lot of times they're very thin and frail and skinny bodies and long fingers and so forth. So now I've got these kind of beefy looking joints. And if you, again, you're lucky because you got your hands right here. You can see how these form kind of ovals. So you kind of come in and put oval-like wrinkles. And I always make this stuff way more pronounced than it'll be because I know I'm gonna soften this all up as I work. Under the finger, and now this is another area where I cheat because we pull out. This is pretty smooth. I don't want to have a lot of ins and outs, but if you just look at your fingers, the way they kind of create two wrinkles and a bump in there, you can go in and create that kind of a look. And if you're two-piece mold, you just do whatever you want. We certainly have to work with certain restrictions, but you know, even the restrictions, you can work with it and get the look you want, and you know the compromise you've had to make, but other people don't, and it's fine. There's ways to trick the eye, like the hands I'm sculpting now, the big ones. They're pretty big because there's things this is something, even though I'm not working on those right now, you really need to be aware of. So you kind of can measure your hand and you say, okay, this is 10 inches and this is whatever it is, 8 inches, really. And so you think, okay, I can sculpt this 11 and sculpt this 9, and that's not really true because this, while it's the smallest circumference, this has to go through it. So a wrist, and trust me, I've made this mistake many times. So when I'm figuring the wrist out, I've got to do, and of course the rubber stretches, but you know, so I got to measure, it's probably the widest right here. So I'm coming up with 10 inches. That's a pretty fat wrist. And where my wrist is much less. I don't know what, let's see. It's 7.5 inches, 8 inches. So that's one of the unfortunate compromises that you have to make when you're making a skin that goes over your skin. You can force them on, you can put extra talc in them, and you can pull hard. But on a day-to-day basis, that's very frustrating to have trouble getting your hands on. So just make sure that that is your smallest dimension. I mean, obviously the fingers are small, but that has to be here, that width plus a little bit. Maybe you could get by with, if it's first generation, you're just going to use the original molds, maybe you could get by with, half an inch, figuring a little stretch. These are just very important things that nobody seems to talk about this stuff. In fact, nobody's doing a lot of hands. I'm sure there's videos out there. I haven't seen them though. So I would go in then and give some shape to this finger to feel like it's not just a tube. And of course we've got these designs here. And then you should make, even though that V's up, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but you should make a line where the fingernail ends. And you can put some detailing like that. So this is basically a monster finger. So that's kind of the look. Again, the fingernail can be as big as you want and so forth. Now the steps to smooth this out and stuff I'll be going over on the other one. Okay, so now we're going to start with the corpse finger. Let's do the same way. You don't have to do it this order, but this is just the way we're doing it for the video. Generally, a corpse is going to be leaner and bonier, and the fingernail actually gets long just maybe because the skin shrinks up and stuff. So we'll give him a pretty good sized fingernail. Now on this guy, I'm not even going to put the extended fingernail. I'm just going to push in right here and create that space. Now my rationale, right or wrong, even though their fingernails are big because the skin shrunk away, they're so busy crawling through the dirt and ripping at people's clothes and things that their fingernails are always broke off. So that's my theory. Anyway, so you'll want to get the fingernail kind of chiseled up, you know, and not long, not extending past the finger, because, you know, it just can't grow well. So then I'm not going to add knuckles to this. I'm going to put my folds of skin and I'm going to carve to make those knuckles. So let's see. I've lost my favorite tool. Oh, here it is. So then I'll go in and kind of imagining the bone. I'm going to create the knuckles by thinning the hand instead of trying to make a muscular looking finger. And the older this finger gets, the skinnier it is. This is an old corpse though, but he's not, you know, eventually your fingernail comes off and you just have bones, a little point, maybe a little stretchy skin over it. And those kinds of things you can still do. You got to fake it on size though, because you can't possibly make something that's the right size that's going to fit on your hand. So you just have to make it bigger and get the look you want. Okay, so I'm thinning kind of making it look like you can see the bone structure under the dry, thinning flesh. Okay, so that is the kind of structure that something that's impoverished would have. It's thin skin stretched over bone, and a good way to figure where it's thin is to just look at a skeleton hand and then, you know, imagine thin skin stretched over that. Now this, of course, would need to be detailed in things like we're going to do with the next one, but that's kind of the difference. So you've gone everywhere from a zombie or corpse to some super muscular beast. There's just a little different attitude in the sculpture, but otherwise a hand's a hand, and it's pretty much going to have 5 fingers. So we're going to go back to our alien hands and finish those out. Okay, so we're back on the alien hands. Now, I've roughed these in with the big rake, and they're basically there. Now, there was this little rake I forgot to mention that's very, very useful. It's got teeth on one side, it's kind of squared off, and this is just wonderful. And see, now that we've dried these, they're a little stiff. They're not, you know, every time you push, and you need to push and put in fingernails and things. So it's just a little firmer. And just watch out, because if you like turn the fan on and you get distracted for 2 hours, you're in trouble. You'll come back and the clay will be all white and cracked, and you'll suffer for it. So, but I left these tips thin, and the reason being, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to have them more pointy, but I did want to firm this up, or broader. That's something I'm going to have to work out as I go. The thing I wanted to show you before we speed up this camera again is these tendons. Now, a lot of times you can just do tendons by coming in. So you look at your own hand. Let's see. So this comes about to here, and you kind of draw those in. And that one's pretty straight. This one comes down here, and this one's off here. So that's where they are. Now, you can, on a normal hand, you can pretty much just dig those in. You can just come in and I will dig these in, but I'm going to add a little to them too. Okay, so you can go in between those lines you just made and create the look of the tendons popping up. But these hands are a little more extreme than you know, something like that. So if you look at this, they're kind of going back and up, and for our purposes, they'll pull out pretty well because it's a fairly straight line. You know, there's not big hooks like that. So I'm going to beef these up just a little bit more. And then still I'll carve in between them to give that stretched flesh look. And I think I mentioned this, but they don't necessarily all show all the way down. You know, this little one, you know, it's there. It's kind of like your veins. Sometimes you can see them on the surface, sometimes you can't. So I'll put them in place, and then I'll kind of decide what to keep and what to blend away. So I'm just going to push them in, make sure they're anchored well. And if you don't anchor them well, then you get in there with your rakes and you start pulling the stuff off. It's very irritating. So I'll start by pinching them into the sculpture to bond it. And then I'll drag my fingers down and really push it in even more. Okay, so I'm still working with the big tool, but it's going to be less and less now because we're starting to get into some pretty decent detail, pretty small detail, I should say. Now there are some little bones and things here, and you know, this is an alien hand, so you don't have to be too careful, but some of the angles and things, especially with a tense hand, you're going to see. So I'm going to throw in a couple of things, just like, there's some kind of little bones in there. And there is a whole bunch of bones right at your wrist so that you can do all this crazy stuff. And these should be straight. You know, there's a lot of fleshy parts in your hands, but actually these tendons are pretty darn straight. Even though there might be a vein going over them or something, they're very straight. They're not bone, but they're close. Okay, I think I'm going to switch over. So now I'm going to the smaller rake, and you can kind of go up and down the mountain. That's not necessarily, I don't do this often, but it kind of pulls it together, and then I can punch it. And trust me, there's not just one way to do things. You can come up with your own style, and honestly, it'll be as different as people are different, your way of sculpting. But there are some techniques that work very well and are commonly used. But so again, when you're doing these details, exaggerate stuff bigger than it's going to be in the end, or you'll just keep putting it back and putting it back, which you'll probably end up doing that anyway. But it helps to really exaggerate those features. So these techniques that I'm showing you, this is the way I do it, and other people do it other ways, and your way of doing it is going to be unique to you. There are some techniques that work very well that I think a lot of sculptors use, but but there is no rules in this. It's what works. Now, if it's not working, you might go back and see, well, how did they do that? And to this day, I can look at great sculptors sculpting, and it's like, oh, that's clever, So I'm just saying, it'll be your own style, but don't be afraid to learn techniques from people along the way, and then make it your own. So now I'm going to put on some knuckles, and this, of course, represents the bone that's under there. Now, these are way more pronounced than they'll be when I get through. But, so that gives me the knuckle, feel for the knuckle. And then you just come in. Let's see here. These are a little different than knuckles on your fingers. So they actually have things like, this kind of comes in. And this kind of goes both ways. And, I'm putting down some pretty bold wrinkles, but in reality, when we wet this down and start brushing, they'll become more and more subtle. And this guy's not too old, but still there's going to be some wrinkling because of this extreme position, and down here certainly. All right, now I've done some things here just to look at. I'm digging in, trying to give him some interesting anatomy. But there's another reason I'm doing this. I'm trying to hide just how big and fat these wrists are. Now, yours don't have to be that fat unless you're going to go into mass production and you're going to make a mold of a mold. But we've got to allow for shrinkage, and then we got to allow for people to easily get these gloves on, and so these tricks kind of distract the eye a little bit. It sounds corny, but and plus it just adds interest. It makes it a little more than human. It's just interesting shapes, which that's one of my goals when I'm sculpting, is I'm trying to find interesting shapes always. So then these fingers, I'm going to, because he's not impoverished, but he's thin. And so I'm going to whittle these down a little bit and create a thinner, more interesting finger. And that doesn't mean it can't just be round. I mean, fingers are pretty round, they're not that. But, this is a monster, and so we're trying to make him a little more unique. Now, I'm only going to go this far right now because I still have not figured out what I'm doing with those fingertips. But then you can come in and do your knuckles like this, and those wrinkles kind of go all the way down. Depending on age, and everything I'm doing is easy. It's simple. You know, you look at the finished thing and say, ooh, I could never do that. That's not true. All of this stuff is just a series of steps that if you know the steps and techniques and you own them, and sometimes that means that you've got to watch a tape over and over. I think I've said this in a previous video, but you generally get, you retain about 10% of something you've watched. And so if you watch it twice, you get 20%, 3 times. You know, I'm not saying you got to watch these 10 times, but you might want to watch them again, especially after you've done it. So, like, say you watch this hand thing, and you make your first pair of hands, and you look at them, you know, well, they're good, but and then you watch it again, but now you're watching it with your eyes open or something. I don't know how to explain it. But now you'll see things that you couldn't see before because you didn't know what to look for. But now that you've been through it, so, oh, that's how. It happens to me still. But just be aware that things take a while to get in your thick skull, and then you can access them. It's just like riding a car, or not riding a car, driving a car. I no longer think. If I want to slow down, the car just slows down. My foot just moves around. I don't want to think, oh, take your foot off the accelerator, put it on the brake, push, don't push too hard. None of that. It slows down as fast as I want, it speeds up as fast as I want, because you own the information, and that just comes with practice. And this may not be something you want to do for a career, but it does help to really know what you're up to as you get started on something like this. And there is a lot of great sources for doing things like this on the internet. Okay, so I'm going to speed the cameras up. I'm going to replicate this side. Oh, no, wait. Let's do a little anatomy over here. So this is just as important as the other side, even though it doesn't get seen as much. But what I've done is I've taken my hand and I've looked at it. It's like, okay, I got this thing here, and I got this thing here, and we got some lines here that I haven't put in yet, but and you know, these things, I'm started to put in those, but just get those rough shapes. And most of this was the big tool, but then you can come in, and it's a little too much maybe for this character. I've got it exaggerated a little bit, but like I say, it's always easier to whittle down. So you can take this smaller rake and beat down some of these details, but also look for interesting shapes. And you know, like I'm putting a little crease in here that's not normal. Wrinkles like this are great to draw the wrinkle, and then I push, and then I kind of yank it, and gives it a nice realistic feel. So and this anatomy is it's represented by these tendons here, and I'm just it's a little alien, but just trying to represent a feel for tendons. So I'm going to speed this thing up and keep an eye on it. Somewhere along the way, I'll figure out what I want to do with those fingertips, and then we'll slow it back down when I get ready to start doing some smoothing with water and sponges and things like that. Turn her up. So now I have gotten all the fingernails on, thickened up the fingers, and we're ready to start smoothing and blending. Now, one thing I noticed that, you know, I got it really, for the type of character, they should be much smoother. There is some wrinkling and stuff as you fold your hands and things, but I'm going to be smoothing away a lot of that, but it still kind of needs to be there. So even if it's very, very subtle, it still feels right, you know, organic and so forth. So I'm just trying to get off all the little chunks of clay that came off the rake, and I'm trying to get it relatively smooth, but I've got other things that I can smooth with besides just this brushing. I've got sponge, I got the black sponge. It's real, that really works great. If you can find that, I got mine off Amazon. Sometimes they're at beauty supply places, and certainly effects makeup places have them. And a lot of what I'm doing right now is just getting the surface moist so that I can get rid of all the raking and so forth. Okay, them fingers is long. I was debating whether to even put the wires in them, and I'm kind of glad I did, because when you get long fingers like this, it's helpful. So this brush is great for really aggressively and you want to be careful to get too crazy, because you don't want to blur everything. But in this case, I'm wanting to blur a lot. I'll have to still come back and define the knuckles and things. Again, I'm sure I probably mentioned it, but a lot of times the difference between doing a good job and a great job is the tools. Starting with the raw materials, you know, the clay is so critical, and the tools that I use make it easy, and this is one of them. I mean, this just makes life easy. So I'm not going to attack those wrinkles. Those make sense. But it did kind of, when I looked at them, it's like, ooh, man, it's no zombie. Chill out here a little bit. I've seen some old aliens, but not too many. You would think, though, you know, if it takes 10,000 light years to get to Alpha Centauri, they get pretty old, but apparently not. No, it's only 60,000 years. Light years. All right. I forget. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a more normal sponge. And we'll try to smooth that all out. Now, I'm going to start pressing with the sponge, and that gives it a little bit of texture, and it also pushes the clay around, so it, you know, it's not so tooled. It just is more natural looking, and it'll have to be tooled. But when I go back now, it's much finer detail, and that'll have to be knocked down too. But basically, this is what you're looking for. Just kind of for this particular character, that's probably the amount of smoothness I'm going to want. I'm trying to beat down this one tendon. So the last step before you paint it and get ready to make the molds is to go in and intensify the lines that have been blurred, and you're only intensifying the ones you want. So in my mind, this is a more youthful character, so I'm going to come in and, you know, even when you're young, you still get these. So I'll start with these. Bring back some of these, but lightly. You just don't want it to look blurry, but you don't necessarily want it to look old. You just little bits of sharpening up the lines. And still, even though this is, you're getting close to the end, you still want them a little bit deeper and more, because we're gonna soften this with a dry paintbrush. It's wet, but it's not real wet. So come in and enhance these primary wrinkles. Okay, so then I get the paintbrush, and these bristles are pretty soft, but they're not super soft. And get the excess water out so you can just make these look natural. And again, this is a note for mass production. You'll want these to be thicker if you're going to be working the molds hard. Like we'll work a mold up to 50 pulls or something. And so if you get too dainty on your lines, they just go away. You know, they go away in the first 6-10 pulls, and you got nothing. And you know, if you're blending away, it's like, oh, I think I should have a little more wrinkling there. Just add it and blend it away with the. And see, every time I dip, I'm doing this because I don't want to. I'm not trying to make something go away now. I'm just trying to make it look natural. And so you can see these have gone a long way from the heavy wrinkling I did, where I got probably a little carried away, but it really doesn't matter. Everything can be fixed. I think if you're going to make a mistake, make your wrinkles too deep or do too much, and then you can smooth them away and end up just keeping what you want, instead of having it too light and then you have to keep add more and add more. The last part of this is to just take, now there's some other sponges that would give a little more pore texture than this one, but this is fine for this guy. Just come back all those areas you've worked and kind of seal the deal with this. And I'm actually pushing with one finger, trying to, even though the clay's fairly firm, I can still affect these lines a little bit and make them look more natural. Again, this is a note for all sculptures in WED. When you're putting it away and you're going to stop working on it for whether it's a few hours or a day or something, you should cover it with a plastic bag and make sure that it's tight on the bottom and sealed with, you know, maybe a tool or a screw or something stuck in there, so that it's not going to dry out. And because boy, we've had it happen here many times when we think we're going to get back something quicker than we do. So that is, you know, I've got to do the same, but you can see what a train wreck this is over here. But with just this and this, bringing back the details with this little tool, really, it becomes, because all that's there, it translates into a more organic flowing thing. I know it seems a little weird. It's like, well, why don't you just keep it smooth to start with? There's actually, these aren't straight lines. These are there's lots of little things. It's if this was a different kind of a character, I might actually put in bumps of clay and make it more fleshy and things. It's just one last thing I want to show you, and not just have it done, because the next time you come back, I'll have these painted and ready to dam, and that is putting a base on here. Now the dam is its own thing, but the base is actually like a part of the sculpture. So let me get some clay. Okay, so this isn't absolutely necessary. I could kind of work it down, but actually all my wood and stuff is there, and I want to clean that up just so that I don't have to try to, you know, because there's wood close here, and so it could hook on the plaster and things. So this base just kind of keeps you out of trouble. So you just put it around. And also, it's kind of a guide for the plaster. You kind of know how thick your mold is down there. It's just helpful. Over here. Okay. So that is that. I'll do one around here. I'll finish off this detail, and I'll connect them together, and then we'll put the dam on. And this is, if you've never done a dam on hands, this is critical that you do it right, because a lot of times you start packing the plaster on and that dam just goes damn, and so that's important to watch how we do it, and because we've had fails on this before, and it's pretty tragic. So we'll go over that. I'll show you how we do it, and we will see you next time here at Monster Lab.
Man, you can talk.